G'day guys and welcome, my name is Michael and I am the Deadaussiegamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Now, I do apologize, it's been a while since I've made a video, so the reason for that is I'm recovering from being quite sick for the past couple of weeks, and of course returning from a vacation, but it did give me some time to ruminate on a very interesting topic, and that is of course dealing with diseases in your campaign. Now, many people have thrown diseases to the side saying, well, this is hyper-realism, this is kind of like playing with the starvation rules or the suffocation rules or things like that. Not really necessary for us to really be looking too deep into, because what impact does it really have to our players and the narrative? Well, I'm here to say that I think there is a huge untapped potential within diseases, not only to build up the narrative world that you're trying to build in, but to also add an interesting dynamic to any challenge or quest that your players may face. We're going to be covering a whole bunch of different topics, how to use them in the narrative, how to use them in combat, as well as discussing when it is appropriate to start playing around with some of the rules, whatever system you happen to be using. So, without any further ado, let's get talking. Also, if I cough and have to drink some tea, I do apologize. I am still battling this sickness, but yeah, hopefully it'll be all well and good by my next video. So, first of all, what is different about diseases compared to other afflictions like, say, poisoning or cursing or anything like that? Well, first of all, a disease is a slow burning effect, something that happens gradually over a long period of time. In fact, you might not even realize that you are diseased due to an incubation period, a period of time in which the player or the player character has no idea that they are in fact infected with some sort of virulent disease waiting to spring forth and sink its talons into them. This can often lead to a very sudden and very alarming discovery partway through an adventure, sometimes at a rather inconvenient time, which can build a sort of animosity. You know, the last thing you want to do is all of a sudden in the middle of a boss battle suddenly go, well, also roll a fort save and take 1d6 points of con damage. Wait, why? Oh yeah, remember 4 towns back a month ago? Yeah, you were bitten by this thing and yeah, now it's affecting you because you were diseased this whole time and surprise! You know, it doesn't really work too well in that regard. But there are definitely ways that you can use diseases to build on your narrative and to make it something fun and enjoyable. So let's talk about how to make them relevant. Firstly, you don't need to use diseases to make a point by infecting your players or your player characters. Don't infect on a side note, don't infect your players with diseases. Let's put that high on the shelf. Do not infect their characters with diseases just because. If you want to get a really strong narrative go of the disease, aim at something that is an NPC, something notable, something that people are going to remember when they're going through the story. What it does at that point is it introduces the concept of a timer. Now, while your player character may be this big, powerful hero who is mighty and strong and has no worry of such things as the sniffles, your average commoner, your average person, your plebeian characters that occupy this world do not necessarily have that same constitution. Giving them diseases can often lead to a strong motivator and a timeline applied to any quest that you give your characters. Allow me to give you an example. Our heroes need to go and speak with a wise wizard who has a secret method to imbue their weapons with a special power so that they may use their weapons against an evil dark lord lurking in the mountains. However, they need to go on a quest in order to get the proper reagents. But alas, there is even more danger ahead, for the wizard is sick. He is afflicted with a dire illness, one that resists even magical treatment. Our players at this point are confronted with several different choices. I mean, they could, of course, hasten their quest to go and find the right reagents to make it back in time for the wizard to help them. They could start a different quest, seeing if they could find another healer or even a special rare magical herb that'll heal this wizard so that they may have more time to gather the parts that they need. All of these things don't serve to make the disease the focal point of the quest, but in turn has the disease function as a catalyst to then boost the, I suppose, investment, the haste that the players approach the quest with. Because the disease itself could be anything. Could be leprosy, could be just an illness. You don't even need to tell the players what illness it is. He is coughing blood, his eyes are turning purple. All of these different symptoms could easily be explained off with a disease. Now, I did kind of gloss over this bit, but I did mention that the disease in this particular example was resistant to magic. This brings me to the second strong narrative, and that is, of course, the idea that diseases don't necessarily have to be cured with a simple wave of the hand. We live in a world of magic. There are, of course, going to be lots of diseases that are conquered with clerics and priests and spellcasters and healers who simply gesture away the disease that is afflicting people. But that being said, diseases are living organisms. They're things that grow and evolve and expand. And naturally, in a world filled with magic, there are going to be diseases which are resistant to magic. In those cases, you need to make sure that your players not only understand that, well, yes, you have gone through the process of exploring the idea of using magic to remove this disease, but that there is also some other way, some other means for them to conquer this disease. Be it a rare flower that grows in the deepest, darkest canyons on the back of a giant yeti, like whatever it is, there has to be some sort of cure that they can pursue should they desire to. Nothing is worse than sort of being given a disease and being told, well, tough luck, I'm terribly sorry, but you have no way of removing it. You are diseased forever. It kind of falls into the same place as, I suppose, scarring and stuff like that in games. I mean, it adds a certain level of realism to your setting, and it does add some consequence, but at the end of the day, no one really wants their players to be suffering from these massive penalty-based afflictions for a long period of time. At least not without, discussing it with the player. Like, if the player wants to play like the sort of dying samurai, that's fine. That's great. That could be a really fun story for you to tell, but it's not something I would impose on someone who wants to be the greatest samurai in the world. And it's like, haha, guess what? You're dying. Not really my jam. All right. So this being said, that is how you would use it in a narrative in order to enhance a quest. Now, excuse me. To look at how you can then use diseases to improve on your immersion. This is the next step of your narrative, because of course, when we're in a role-playing game, we're trying to lose ourselves in the world. We're trying to lose ourselves in the illusion of the setting. Now, obviously, this falls into the same category of people that go into hyper-realism. Like, yes, there are a million different factors that make reality what it is, and those little details are what makes a fantasy game more believable. Diseases fall into this category, but you don't want to look at it from the perspective of being so real that your players are like, oh, we have to, every time we cut someone, do we need to go wash our hands and disinfect ourselves because every single Joe Blog in this entire kingdom is carrying filth fever and we don't want to have to be making these saves over and over and over and over again. Oh, what's that? This bandit has tetanus. Fan-freaking-tastic. It just gets too much. It becomes far too bogged down. So diseases need to be sparingly used and for a purpose. If they aren't going to be used sparingly and for a purpose, if you're going to apply it as a whole-scale effect to your narrative, you only want it to affect two elements of your story. You want it to affect your interactions with the population, and you want it to affect the economy. So by this I mean, when you're entering a town that, say, has a slum that is filled with diseases, you then get the impression that people do not want to go and deal with the people in the slums because they are contagious. This does not mean the players go there and suddenly, oh no, we're afflicted because everyone's contagious. But you build that story. You build the story that, yes, this guy looks super diseased. He's got pustules leaking ooze from his face. That guy there's eyeball just fell out. And this dude here is like black crusty nails that look like they're bleeding and on fire. All of these guys here, you just build up the idea that they are diseased and you don't want to touch them. You do not need to necessarily have a whole in-game mechanic following that narrative. It's simply you've built the world. You've built the idea that you want to build. Through the population, of course. The other side is the economy. So if, for example, there is a large and virulent plague running rampant through the town, I mean, yeah, you could take it from the perspective that every enemy that they face or every person they encounter, there's a fort save involved, but that gets tiring. It's fishing for failure. It's just make fort saves until you lose and you are now afflicted, and then go and have to deal with it, and then remake those fort saves again until you are afflicted and then go get it removed, which is boring. The more interesting element to diseases for your players will be how readily available certain resources are. We need healing. Let's go to a priest. The priest says, sorry, everything has been given to curing the sick. We have done everything we can. We just cannot afford to be giving our spells to people at this period of time because of the disease. All right, that's okay. We'll go to a potion master. Hey, potion master, tell us, give us your finest healing potion, please. And he says, you cannot handle my... No, he says, no, again, I have to give all my potions away because... Well, not give them away, but I had to sell all my potions because the wealthy and people wanted to hunker down against this oncoming disease. And all of a sudden, your players are caught in a kind of like this strange scenario where they're like, oh, well, we need to be really careful because the only heals we're going to get is from our healer, if we have one. And that builds up and creates that realistic, immersive world without necessarily, falling head first into your players being constantly diseased. Now, while you're within this story, there are obviously going to be two people. There are going to be the victims of the disease, and they are going to be the people that are trying to deal with the diseases. Victims, we can kind of tell how to handle them. If you've got a disease, play around with the symptoms. They go purple. They have polka dots. An arm falls off. They bleed from their noses. Play with how long it takes for them to be afflicted. It's a month before they really suffer anything. Or they spend a week completely bedridden before falling into a coma. The interesting element is the people who aren't diseased and how they interact with the afflicted. You have the people who go out of their way to try and cure and help the afflicted. You have people who are selfish and self-important who are trying to... Sorry, not self-important. Selfish and self-sustaining. Like, they want to survive. So they take measures to prevent themselves from becoming infected. You also have a third, very hidden group who are trying to exploit the disease. And that's, I think, where a lot of the great, juicy narrative pieces for you playing with the disease comes in. Imagine being in a town where someone is selling a cure, but the cure is just seawater. Imagine being in a scenario where someone has decided to put these diseased people on and say to them, we will give you free passage to an island paradise where you will be treated and you will be cured of your diseases, but actually send them to an enemy nation so that they can be afflicted by the disease as well. People who use diseased populations for their own gain can make some of the best villains and best stories. So always consider that as well. Like, the disease isn't necessarily just being used by you as a GM for your story. It could be being used by your NPCs for their own evil plots and purposes. Now, a lot of people are going to argue with me on this, but again, when people ask me this, I always tell them the same thing. Anyone who uses poisons and diseases in this fashion is evil. So you want to make sure that whoever's doing it is someone with very low moral fiber and is not against the idea of being completely and utterly dishonest. All right. So this covers narrative and how we use diseases in a narrative sense. How do we use it in combat? Well, purely mechanically, diseases are gained through one of four methods: injury, contact, inhalation, or ingestion. All of these things are... Well, okay, ingestion is very hard to come by unless someone poisoned a bottle of potion or something, or someone literally pins you during a battle and then force feeds you like rotten meat or something. These things are highly unlikely for ingestion. What is likely is inhalation, contact, and injury. Excuse me. Injury-based ones, obviously people who have in some shape or form corrupted their weapons or their tools. Creatures who are corrupted in themselves, such as ghouls and werewolves and the like, can carry diseases with them. And of course, they comprise the majority of how diseases are currently run. My recommendation is, if you are going to use diseases in this way, keep them open, right? The injury-based diseases need to be known. If you are fighting a werewolf, have your characters come upon, or at least have ready access to, the knowledge that werewolves carry lycanthropy, or that ghouls carry ghoul fever, or that, dire rats carry filth fever. All of these things should be well known and reasonably easy to treat. If you do that, it means that your players trust you. Your players get to that point where they trust the fact that, yes, you've let them know because this is a common thing. This is something that is readily known. The ones that are a bit more sneaky are your contact and your inhalation diseases, things that your players may not even realize they've been afflicted with. Now, when using these, because of its sneaky nature, you need to follow the one golden rule, and that is, if you are going to disease your player, you need to make sure that there is a point or a method that they can remove that disease. Okay? Because you could get into a fight with a bandit, not realize that he is carrying, let's say, blood veil. You accidentally touch him because you're a monk and you punched him in the face. Fantastic. At the time, you didn't think anything of his rash or his scarring. A couple weeks later, you realize that you've got scarring and rashes on your hands. You have no idea because you as a player, it's been 4 or 5 games maybe. You have no idea where it's come from. All of a sudden, you're frantically like, what the hell is this? Where is this coming from? Let's go see a doctor. Okay, doctor, what's this come from? And if the doctor turns around and says, well, I don't know, I've never seen this before, it's a brand new disease, then you're just really punishing your player. And you kind of encourage them to try and find quick fixes. So it's things like, oh yes, we'll just cast remove disease and that'll be it. This isn't a disease being used in its full potential. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the sneaky ones that you do have some sort of purpose, have some sort of line that they need to follow. So let's go with that bandit idea. You've hit the bandit. The bandit laughs and he says, ha, now you carry this curse with you. Now it's not a curse, it is a disease. But your player then starts viewing it as the curse. So they start exploring how to get rid of this thing. So they go and see a witch, which they find out about. The witch tells them that, oh, well, in order to do this, you need this herb, that herb, this herb, that herb. But all of them are protected by various creatures of nature. So the PCs now have to go on a quest. They go on the quest, they cure the disease, all is happy and all is well. Now, this might not be how you want the central focus of the narrative to go, but it is simply an example of how you can use it as a central point, and your players will then start trusting you to use contact and inhalation poisons, diseases, because, well, it means that you will have a way out for them. That means you won't punish them and say, well, too bad, you are diseased and you just didn't know about it, and suddenly, bam, you are afflicted and you have to take this amount of damage. Because I don't feel like that's a good way to handle diseases, or any kind of damage, really, poison or the like. All right, so next thing, how else can you use diseases in combat? Well, there are a couple of ways. Obviously, you could have someone afflicting the PCs. That's fine. Now, if the PCs are afflicted, there are ways to turn it back on them. I've come up with a couple of spells that I've used in my games. These are homebrew spells for various games, which have been like kind of quarantine wards. So it's kind of like a magic circle against corruption, or magic circle against affliction. So anyone who is suffering from a disease is kept out of an area. Seems to make sense that this is a spell that would exist. So if you use that in combat, and let's say, for example, you are dealing with a character who has a diseased weapon, slashes at this person, there is no effect immediately. He then uses the magic circle, and suddenly that player is hindered. There's now this, excuse me, there's now this invisible shield that is stopping the PC from being able to interact with the enemy, but not the enemy doing the other way around. So all of a sudden, these corruption wards can change the pace of the battle and can change the scope of challenges that their PCs are facing. Maybe there's a city under a very strict quarantine, so the PCs that arrive notice that a couple of their members aren't allowed in the city because these wards will not allow them to. So this and many more are some great ways to use them in combat. Actually, another couple of ones. Symptoms are really fun, and I think a lot of people gloss over the symptoms. They just simply turn around and say, yeah, you've got a rash. But those can have tangible effects in combat as well. Like your rash becomes so itchy that you take a negative penalty on your attacks. Or all of a sudden you start breaking out in a cold sweat, make a fort save against heat exhaustion. Or even like you make a will save as you start to hallucinate. You feel your head get dizzy and you could swear that you hear your mother's voice calling you. All of these things can really add to the cinematic of a combat. And I'm a big fan of cinematic combat. I love it being more dynamic than simply, I kick your shin, you kick my shin, I kick your shin, you kick my shin, I kick your shin. I like it being like really dynamic, like the blade sings through the air as the edge whistles through the chest of the bandit, blood spraying out. I mean, that could be very, very faffy for some people, but you know what? I like the faff. It's why I play. I play for the faff. So, there's that. So yes, this is how I do it in combat, is I would keep it as an active part of that narrative cinematic. If you want to add more challenge to an encounter because your players are doing so well, then feel free to add little things like that. If they are struggling, however, I don't recommend you start throwing the disease on top of what they have to deal with, and allow them to kind of focus on overcoming the challenge more than dealing with the disease. All right, so that's pretty much all I've got on my notes, but I do have one last question, which actually came from Eric, or Mr. Beardsley from the Discord channel, who asked about handling diseases at various levels. When you're a low level, diseases are very potent with a large effect and a very expensive cost to fix. Whereas at high levels, that same value is often not enough to make a significant difference, and the saving throws are much lower, so it's easier to overcome. How do you handle diseases at the various levels? I'm going to be strictly, this is GM talk only, right? If I want someone to be diseased, I make them diseased. If not, I don't disease them. And I know this sounds terrible. I know people are going, oh, well, you should be doing the saves properly. And don't get me wrong, I play readers written for diseases that are injury-based, that come from monsters and stuff like that. Perfectly fine. I do that as much as I can. But if I want to make someone diseased at low level, I just do it. If I don't want them to be diseased, say they fought a rat and they've ended up with filth fever. Filth fever is so easy to fix. I'm not even remotely going to touch that. They can fix that on their own. Ghoul fever? Okay, see, that's a little bit trickier to conquer. That can really lead to some problems. So maybe something along the lines of, their skin starts to welt and you notice there's a discoloration, almost like a necrotic growth. As it sort of appears on their neck. They go check it out to a doctor. The doctor says, hey, you've got ghoul fever, and he fixes it there and then. You do not need to make it so that low levels suffer the diseases, because you are the GM and you can obviously figure a way out. At higher levels, exact same thing in reverse. If I want you to be diseased, I will make you diseased, unless you roll a natural 20, at which point I don't argue. It's just like, you know what, natural 20. Fair enough, fair call, I tried. He could be diseased now. No. Sometimes I do that. So at high levels, simply adjust it accordingly. And the explanation you can give your players is the same that I give, which is, a disease is a living organism that gets its vitality from its host. Whoever the disease ends up in, they change based on who they're in, based on their vitality, based on their strengths, their weaknesses, their immune system, a whole bunch of different factors. So what might take this person 1 month to be afflicted and take 1d4 points of damage to their strength might be for you, because you are so strong and so mighty, 3 days before you take 1d6 points of damage. Now, again, like I said, this is a lot of GM tweaking and tooling and stuff like that. But remember, it is all about trust. Your players need to trust the fact that if you are going to do that you are going to also give them a way out within a period of time, so that they are not going to be crippled beyond repair or die from their results. Which, by the way, is another element of diseases as well. I find diseases have the more harsh final blow, Honestly, if I had to say any disease mechanic I love, it had to be from the Starfinder setting. Because what it basically was is, here's a disease. Here is a track that basically goes, you take a little penalty, you take a medium penalty, take a little bit higher than a medium penalty, and then you take a massive penalty, and then you're dead. That's it. That's the progression. How it gets about that is entirely up to you to determine, but you as a GM have that flexibility. They make these fort saves, and they go through the progression, and as it gets worse, it becomes harder to resist, and then eventually they die. That for me works so much simpler and so much more clean than many of the different disease rules that are currently out there at the moment. So if you do have a chance to sort of improvise how a disease works, always remember that progression, right? Start with your incubation period, take your time, let it simmer, let the players forget that they've even got a disease. Have the affliction appear and manifest in a small way. This is an idea that they are in fact infected and they have some time to deal with it. You have your first minor affliction, something that is going to be tangible, something that, excuse me, something like a cough, for example, something that will maybe disrupt what they're doing. You then have the more severe encounter where they start taking maybe ability score damage, or maybe they become unable to focus on things, or they start seeing hallucinations, something a bit more severe. And then finally you have your intense detriment, something like they are bedridden, they can't get anywhere, they can't do anything, these kinds of things. Sorry. Okay, so that's literally my my video on dealing with diseases. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope it helped you guys out. I do have a couple of little announcements that I wanted to make. Number one is we have started up our Twitch channel, and we're starting to stream on Twitch. Slowly but surely, we're going to add more stuff to that, and then we're going to keep adding stuff to YouTube, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. So if you want to check us out live on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/Deadaussiegamer. I've got one game on there at the moment. It is at 3 a.m. GMT plus 8, which is, I think, 8 p.m.-ish for our fans in the UK. Basically, it is a live play for my Patreon game. If you want to become one of our Patreons, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/DeadAussieGamer. Our $40 Patreons get to play in these games, and we run them live, and it's a really great session. We also do stuff with the audience, so people who interact with the chat and who tip and donate get to actually flip plot twists, which I actually then use in the game to make the game more challenging, or in some cases easier for my players as they play. If you guys want to check out our stuff on Facebook, then head on over there at facebook.com/DeadAussieGamer. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from it, but I am going to be starting to add a few things and articles here and there when I get around to doing it. Oh, and before I forget, speaking of Patreon, next month we are actually doing a big thing on our Patreon, so stay tuned for that as well. There's going to be a whole bunch of different changes to the rewards. We're doing a live Patreon exclusive podcast. We're doing a live Patreon exclusive series, which is going to focus entirely on acting and the art of performing as an entertainer, in the context of being a role-playing GM or even being a player. So be sure to check in for that. And of course, if you want to join our fans on Twitch and become a player for one of these games, then you can join our Mythic tier and yeah, come along and have a couple of good games. So without any further ado, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, guys, as always, from the Dead Aussie Gamer, game hard or die trying. Or like me, just die because you're sick. You know, I hope you guys are doing better than I am. Peace!